I discovered I was a memory, wiped clone, and the truth changed everything. Reddit stories. They say every family hides something. Some bury secrets in silence, others in shame. But mine? Ours hid it in a wall. Before I tell you what happened, you need to understand the kind of family I grew up in. From the outside, we were the type you'd see in holiday catalogs. Mom with her neat hair and perfectly ironed blouses, Dad with his Sunday morning pancakes and weathered smile, and me the only child, the golden child, the quiet one who never asked too many questions. That was our dynamic. No drama, no yelling, but also no depth, like we were actors reading from a very old, very rehearsed script. I always thought that was normal. I didn't realize something was off until I left for college. College was the first time I felt the air shift. I met people whose families argued at dinner, cried on the phone, called 3 times a day just to say hi. That wasn't us. My mom called only when she needed something practical, a tax form, a recipe, or the name of a detergent brand she'd recommended once. My dad was worse. He'd text me a thumbs up emoji when I asked a final or a single cool when I got an internship. For a while, I didn't mind. That's just how we were. Until it wasn't. When I moved back into my childhood home temporarily after losing my job and breaking up with my fiancée in the same miserable week, things began to feel weird. At first it was just little things. Mom's hesitation when I asked questions about her side of the family. The way Dad would tense up whenever I mentioned my grandmother. And then there was the attic. Always locked, always too dusty, or too dangerous, or just junk. I didn't push. But the house itself seemed like it was waiting for something to happen. The day it started was a rainy Tuesday. I remember because I was bored out of my mind, pacing the upstairs hallway while the storm groaned outside. A corner of the wallpaper near my old bedroom had peeled back slightly. Out of boredom more than curiosity, I tugged at it. It came off in a strip, and underneath was something odd. Not drywall, not paint, but wood, and wedged into a small gap where 2 planks didn't quite meet was a dusty envelope. I had to use tweezers to get it out. It was thick, sealed, and unmarked. Inside was a photograph. Just one. A black and white image of a girl, maybe 12 or 13, standing beside a bicycle. Her hair was in braids, her smile shy. But it wasn't the photo itself that shook me. It was the fact that she looked exactly like me. Not kind of, not vaguely. Exactly. Down to the shape of her nose, the tilt of her chin, even the slight gap in her front teeth that I'd always been self-conscious about. It was like looking into a mirror that had aged 60 years. The back of the photo had a name, Anya, summer 1958. No last name, no location. Just that? I brought it downstairs, unsure what I expected. I showed it to Mom. Her face turned to stone. Then she smiled. But it was that tight, lipped, too wide smile that people use when they're trying to pretend they didn't just see a ghost. "Oh," she said. "Must be a distant cousin. You know, some of us just have strong genes." She took the photo from my hand, slipped it into a drawer, and changed the subject. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, the photo was gone. That's when I started digging. My parents never talked about their families much, especially Mom. I'd always been told that both sets of grandparents died before I was born, that there were no cousins, no aunts, no uncles, just us. But suddenly, that didn't sit right. So I did what any stubborn only child would do. I opened the locked attic. It wasn't hard. The key was taped under the stairs. That in itself was suspicious. Inside the attic, it was like time had stopped. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, furniture covered in yellowed sheets. The air thick with dust and old wood. It took hours to go through it all, and honestly, I almost gave up. Until I found the tin. It was a small metal box, rusted shut. When I finally pried it open, it was full of letters, dozens, all addressed to Dear Anya, all written in the same loopy, feminine handwriting. The dates range from 1959 to 1965. And the sender, someone named L. I read every single one. They painted a picture I wasn't ready for. The letters were full of love, grief, desperation. They talked about a girl being sent away, about secrets that had to be kept, for everyone's safety, and a promise that couldn't be broken. One line still haunts me. "You are not forgotten, even if the world insists you never existed." The last letter ended abruptly with no signature, just a smeared ink blot where a name had been. I confronted Mom again. This time, she didn't deny it. She just looked at me for a long time and said, "It was all for the best." I asked her who Anya was. She said nothing, just turned and walked out of the room. I heard her crying that night for the first time in my life. Silent, shuddering sobs through the wall. I didn't know what to do. I wanted answers, but I also wanted to protect her, which sounds ridiculous now, considering what I found next. The library archives were dusty and slow, but they didn't lie. There was an Anya Lena Karpov, born 1946, died 1960. The records listed her as a ward of the state, entered into the system at age 11. No parents, no siblings, no family. Just a single photo in the file, the one I'd found in the wall. And then there was the final page, a police report. The details were minimal, but clear. Anya had died in a fire at a state-run girls' home. Circumstances labeled suspicious. No known relatives came to claim the body. She was buried in an unmarked grave. I stared at her file for a long time, because there was something off, something I couldn't ignore. The birth date, July 3, 1946, my mother's birthday. That was the moment it all cracked open. I remembered stories my mother used to tell when I was small, bedtime fairy tales that always featured a brave girl in a lonely place, waiting for someone to come get her. I remembered her fear of fire, her nightmares. I remembered her freezing up at the sound of sirens. But most of all, I remembered her eyes when she saw that photo. She wasn't seeing a cousin, she was seeing herself, which meant it couldn't be. It couldn't have died. The report said so. There was a body, there was a funeral. So who was my mother? I went home and confronted her one last time. This time I didn't ask. I told her what I knew. That Anya didn't die. That someone took her place in that fire. That she must have escaped, changed her name, started over. That she'd spent the last 60 years hiding behind a life she built from ashes. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. She just said, "They let me go. One life for another. I wasn't supposed to exist anymore." I didn't know what to say. All I could do was sit there as the woman who raised me, the woman I thought I knew, confessed to not just surviving, but erasing herself to do it. And then she said something that chilled me to the bone. Something I'll never forget. "It wasn't just for me, it was for you." For me? I didn't understand. Until the next day, I received a call from a blocked number. A calm voice. A man? He asked for Anya. I said no one by that name lived here. There was a pause. Then he said, "Tell her we remember. And we haven't forgotten the debt." Then he hung up. I stared at the phone, heart racing, mind spinning. What debt? What had my mother done to survive? And most terrifying of all, what had she passed on to me? The call haunted me more than the photo ever did. A voice I didn't recognize, speaking with eerie calm, mentioning a debt from a life that was supposed to be buried decades ago. That night I didn't sleep. I just sat in bed, clutching the phone, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. But something told me this wasn't over. You don't get to unearth a secret like that and walk away untouched. You don't peel back layers of history and expect the past to stay buried, especially when it was buried alive. I began watching my mother more closely. The way she avoided mirrors, the way she flinched at certain songs, the way she checked the locks 3 times before bed. None of it was new, but now it made sense. She wasn't paranoid, she was haunted, and not just metaphorically. Something was following us, or maybe it had never stopped. The next morning, I checked the attic again. This time I noticed something I hadn't before. A smaller, false bottom in the trunk where I found the letters. Beneath it was a faded journal, the pages brittle, the ink bleeding in places. The cover had no title, just a childish drawing. A little house with smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, it was Anya's voice, my mother's, but younger, rawer, frantic. The entries started in 1957. She wrote about the place. A cold, sterile building with locked doors and strict routines. She called it the home, but it was clear it was more than that. Girls arrived and disappeared without explanation. Anya wrote about whispers in the night, about people coming for the ones who didn't obey. About a woman with gloves who carried a clipboard and never smiled. "They watch us sleep," she wrote. "They weigh our thoughts. They say it's to make us better. But some girls wake up screaming with blood on their hands." The final entries were panicked, incomplete. One was just a list of names. Some crossed out, some circled. Then, "They chose me. Tomorrow I go to the basement." The last page was ripped, but I could still read one word. Help. I showed the journal to my mother. She went pale. Then she did something I'd never seen her do. She apologized. Over and over. For what she didn't say. Just that she never wanted me to know. That knowing would put me in danger. That they watch for curiosity. It's how they find you again. When I asked who they were, she shook her head and said, "The ones who made me forget who I was." That night I dreamed of fire. Of a girl running down a hallway that kept stretching further, her hands blistered, the walls closing in. I woke up gasping, fingers clenched around my sheets like I'd been trying to hold on to something. Or someone. The next week was a blur. I became obsessed. I scoured old newspapers for mentions of the home. Nothing. It was like it had never existed. I drove to the county records office. The address listed for the state girls' home now belonged to a luxury apartment complex. I visited anyway. As soon as I stepped onto the property, I felt it. Something heavy, electric, like the air before a storm. The concierge smiled too wide, too still, and told me there was no record of a building ever existing before the condos were constructed in 1972. But the pavement told a different story. Cracked in places, the lines of an older foundation peeking through like scars. Back home, I noticed the phone again. Missed calls. Untraceable numbers. Once a voicemail. No words, just faint humming. A lullaby. One my mother used to sing when I was small. When I played it for her, she covered her ears and whispered, "She's still singing." After all this time. That's when I realized I wasn't just chasing a secret. I was being dragged into it. I kept reading the journal. Some pages were tucked into the lining, missed during the first search. One had a rough map. Lines connecting rooms, arrows leading to something marked X. The basement, another page was a list of rules. 1. Don't speak their names. 2. Don't bleed where they can smell it. 3. Never answer the third knock. It felt childish, like a ghost story whispered between bunk beds. But something in my gut told me these rules had been written with desperate sincerity. And Rule 3? That one stuck with me. I told myself it was all psychological. I was stressed, sleep-deprived, unraveling. But that didn't explain what happened next. I started hearing the knocks, always at night. Always soft, 2 knocks, then silence. Then, sometimes, a third, but only when I was alone. I tried to rationalize it, the pipes, the wind. But when I opened the door after the third knock one night and found a single hair braid on the porch, identical to the ones in the photo of Anya, I knew this was something else, something reaching back. My mother saw the braid and collapsed. She was taken to the hospital that night. They said it was exhaustion. I knew better. While she slept, I searched her room. In her closet, behind a stack of photo albums, I found a shoebox with an address written in faded ink, Black Hollow. Wrote 17. Mile marker 12. Taped inside the lid was a note. If they find me again, don't follow. But if they find you first, run. I should have listened. But something about Black Hollow drew me. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I was too far gone to stop. Maybe some part of me already knew what I'd find. The road to Black Hollow was overgrown, half erased by nature. My GPS died 10 miles out. I followed the mile markers. At 12, I pulled over. Nothing but trees, but deep within the woods, just barely visible, was a fence. Rusted, broken in places. And beyond it, the remains of a building. Charred beams, stone foundation, iron bars twisted with heat. This was it, the home. Or what was left of it. I stepped inside. It was like walking into memory, not mine. Someone else's. Maybe Anya's. The walls still held whispers. The floors still creaked with the weight of forgotten things. In one corner of the basement, the one from the map, I found a door. It shouldn't have been intact, but it was. Blackened, warped, but standing. I knocked once, twice, then froze. I remembered the rule. Never answer the third knock. So when the third knock came, from the other side, I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached the car. And even then, I felt it. The presence, watching, waiting. That night I burned the journal, every page. But the next morning a copy appeared on my nightstand, identical. But this time, the last page had changed. It said, "You saw the door. Now we see you." I tried to act normal, to live my life. But things followed me. People stared too long on the street. Strangers knew my name. My dreams bled into reality. And then my mother disappeared. Vanished. No sign of struggle. No note. Just her empty bed, the humming still playing faintly from her phone. The police were baffled. But I knew they took her back. Or maybe she went willingly. Either way, I was alone. And that's when I realized the twist in the story. The debt. It wasn't my mother's anymore. It was mine. They say inherited debt is the cruelest kind. Not the kind with interest rates or credit collectors, but the kind written in blood, in silence, in the things no one talks about. The kind passed down not through words, but through absence, through unspoken rules, through doorways you never meant to open. And I had opened too many. I'd seen the photo, read the letters, heard the third knock. I'd gone to Black Hollow, to the place where memory bled into ash. And now the debt had crossed the line. From her. To me. At first, it was small. Glitches in my daily life. I'd come home to find drawers open that I never touched. My computer would flicker to static for exactly 13 seconds at 3:03 a.m. every night. I started receiving mail with no return address. Blank envelopes, sealed with a black wax symbol I didn't recognize, but that made my skin crawl to touch. The air in my apartment grew heavier by the day, as if the walls themselves were remembering something they wanted to forget. I tried to ignore it, to function, to go back to work, return to routine. But normalcy doesn't exist once you've seen behind the curtain. My coworkers whispered about me when they thought I wasn't listening. One left a sticky note on my desk that simply read, "She's humming again." I hadn't said anything about the humming. I hadn't told anyone. But they knew. It wasn't just my life unraveling. It was reconstructing into something older. Something not mine. I began to see things. Not illusions, not ghosts exactly, but echoes. One morning I woke up and there was a girl sitting at the foot of my bed. Braided hair, black shoes, no eyes. Just dark hollows and a smile too wide for her face. I blinked. She was gone, but my blanket was wet where she had been. And it smelled like smoke. I knew I couldn't stay in that apartment. I packed a bag and left everything behind. But where do you run when you're being hunted by memory? When the thing chasing you isn't a person, but an agreement made long before you were born. I checked into a motel 2 towns over. Cheap, quiet, forgettable. The kind of place where people vanish all the time and no one asks why. I thought I'd be safe there. But safety is an illusion, especially when you're already marked. That night, I dreamed of the basement again. Not how it was, but how it used to be. Clean, cold. Fluorescent lights humming overhead. Rows of metal beds. Girls in gray dresses, all facing the same direction. One turned toward me. Her mouth opened. She didn't speak. She screamed. A scream so loud I woke up choking on my own breath, the blood in my ears. The mirror in the motel bathroom had cracked down the middle. I knew then that I couldn't run anymore. I had to face it, not just the past, but the reason it still had claws in the present. I went back to the archives, not the local ones. These were deeper, state level. Accessed by special permission, the kind given only to people who knew exactly what they were looking for. I used my mother's name, her original name, Ania Karpov. At first, the clerk told me nothing existed. No such person, no records. I asked to see the physical index. While she was distracted, I slipped behind the desk and accessed the restricted files. The folder wasn't labeled Enya. It was labeled Experiment 34B. Inside were photos, scans, faded medical documents, brain imaging, psychological notes, observational charts. They were studying her, my mother, tracking her responses to certain stimuli. Sound, light memory triggers. There was mention of auditory conditioning, memory suppression, and most disturbingly, a voluntary identity fragmentation. One file was a log of behaviors. Subject resists third-stage integration. Displays subconscious resistance. Multiple personalities attempting to reconcile conflicting memory layers. Next to this, in red ink, threat of regression imminent. Consider reprocessing or elimination. Another page had a list of names, 27, girls all young, each with a line through it, except two. One was circled Enya, the other, unnamed offspring. Subject unconfirmed. Me. That was the moment the last illusion died. My mother wasn't just hiding. She had escaped something far darker than shame or trauma. She had been part of something, built, and I was the leftover piece. A name stood out at the bottom of one report. Dr. Lorna Shevik, a supervisor, a neuroscientist specializing in experimental trauma therapy. Her signature was on every page. I tracked her down. Or rather, I tracked down the foundation she supposedly ran in the 1960s. It no longer existed, but a private facility had absorbed its assets, the Horizon Institute for Behavioral Development. Located upstate. Isolated. Private. I drove there. It was dusk when I arrived. The building was sleek, modern, glass and metal. The kind that says, we have nothing to hide, but only because everything worth hiding is buried deeper. I pretended to be a dunner. It got me past the lobby. The halls were sterile. Too quiet. I told the receptionist I was there for a tour. She smiled, handed me a badge, and told me someone would be with me shortly, but I didn't wait. I slipped down a corridor while her back was turned. Most doors were locked, except one. Behind it was a room with a single chair and a mirror. I recognized the setup instantly, a psychological observation room. On the wall were dozens of old photographs, newspaper clippings, notes. And in the center, my mother's photo. Younger, cleaner, her hair perfect, her expression blank. Below it, a notice subject reintegrated into civilian life. Monitor offspring for signs of residual programming. My breath caught. Residual programming. I turned to leave, but the door had closed behind me. Locked. The lights dimmed. A soft humming began. Familiar, hypnotic. The lullaby. It was coming from the ceiling like an intercom. My head swam. My vision blurred. I fell to my knees, images flashing behind my eyes. Fire screaming, a door slamming shut, a voice whispering, one life for one life. And then silence. The door opened. A woman stood there, white coat, gray hair pulled tight. Dr. Lorna Shevik. She looked at me like I was a specimen in a petri dish. You shouldn't be here, she said. Her voice was calm, too calm. You don't understand what your mother did to protect you. I stood dizzy. Protect me from what? From yourself? She stepped aside. I ran. I didn't stop until I was in my car, hands shaking, breath shallow. I drove until the sky turned black and the road disappeared behind me. When I finally stopped, I was in the middle of nowhere. I checked my phone, no signal. The time read 3:03 a.m. The radio turned on by itself, static. Then a voice, not my mother's. Mine. You're almost ready, it said. The screen flickered. And then the car shut off. I sat in the darkness, the words echoing in my skull. You're almost ready. For what? What am I becoming? And what happens when the debt is finally paid? The static didn't stop. Even with the keys out, even with the battery long dead, the car's radio kept humming that broken signal, a fractured lullaby stitched with whispers in my own voice. Not recordings, not echoes, responses. It was like something was listening, and worse, learning. I should have been terrified, and I was, but beneath the fear something darker had started to stir in mere recognition. A sick sense of familiarity, like I wasn't hearing something foreign, but remembering a language I had forgotten how to speak. I abandoned the car by the roadside, left everything but my bag, wallet. I'd gone, and it felt strangely right, like shedding a skin that no longer fit. I walked for miles through darkness until I saw the lights of a diner blinking in the distance. A tiny, cracked neon sign that just read, E8. Inside, everything was too still. A single man sat in the corner booth, sipping coffee without drinking. The waitress had lipstick but no expression. No music played. No plates clinked. When I sat down, no one looked up. The menu was blank. I didn't speak, and neither did they. But the waitress brought me black coffee anyway. No cream, no sugar. I took one sip and gagged. It was ice cold and tasted like ash. I didn't ask for another. I just sat there, feeling the walls close in. A TV above the counter buzzed to life, showing static, then grainy footage. A girl in a hallway, long braids, gray dress, walking slowly. Behind her, shadows flinched, then disappeared. The camera panned. The hallway had no end. The footage glitched, then cut to black. The waitress finally spoke. "They're waiting." "Who?" I looked up. "Who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she slid a small envelope across the table. I didn't want to touch it, but my hand moved anyway. Inside was a single strip of paper, yellowed and brittle. Location reassigned, pace 4 initiated. Subject ready for reclamation. On the back, an address, St. Delora Asylum. Decommissioned. Another placed. Another ghost. I left the diner without saying a word. As I stepped into the night, I glanced back. The windows were dark. The neon sign was gone. Abandoned. Gone. Like it had never existed. I followed the address. It took me days, hitchhiking, walking, stealing bus rides under assumed names. I didn't care anymore. My identity had dissolved the moment I left that radio-lit car. Along the way, I began to dream in second person. Not as myself, but as someone watching me. I saw my own hands through a glass wall. I saw myself speak without sound. I saw needles, lights, paper stamped with red ink. Then I arrived. St. Delora Asylum sat nestled in fog like it had been grown from the very soil. Ivy strangled its walls, windows boarded, gates rusted shut. And yet, the front door stood open, just enough to whisper welcome. Inside, the air was damp and stale. The ceilings groaned above me. Old papers littered the floors, thick with mildew. Wheelchairs rusted in corners. A child's shoe. A shattered clock, frozen at 3:03. And everywhere, signs that this place hadn't been abandoned at all. Just waiting, I moved deeper. Room after room of peeling paint and forgotten screams, until I found the records hall. Doors labeled with single letters. A for abandonment, B for behavior, C for conditioning. I found S, sat in the dark, flipping through rotted files. And there it was again, her name, Enya file S34B. Subject removed post-incident. Memory suppression protocol failed. Transferred to phase 2 domestic placement via silent exit method. There was also an audio tape. A reel. The kind no one used anymore. I found the machine, plugged it in, and played the tape. Crack silence. Then, subject does not recall initial trauma. Conditioning successful. However, fragments persist in dream state. Recommendation: monitor offspring for cognitive bleed. Meine voice. Younger. Frantic. Please. You said it was over. You said I could leave. I did everything right. I never told. I never remembered. End of tape. I took the reel with me and kept moving. Downstairs, I found a room labeled Teach ER. Inside, rows of rusted chairs faced a blank screen. A projector whirred on as I entered, though no one touched it. And then, flickering to life. Footage I'd never seen. My life. Me as a child. Playing alone in our backyard, reading by flashlight, crying into my pillow, but always from somewhere else, like I was being watched. Always watched. I turned to run, and someone stood in the aisle. A man. Featureless, smooth face, like wax melted in the sun, he pointed. Phase 5 begins now, he said, though his mouth did not move. The lights went out. When I awoke, I was in a hospital bed, strapped down, my wrist bruised, my mouth dry. A monitor beeped softly nearby. The room was white. Too white. Clean in a way that felt sterilized, not safe. A nurse entered. Clipboard. Syringe. No name tag. Where am I? She smiled, but her eyes didn't. You're home. No. I was in the asylum. You've had a break. Just rest. I screamed. Fought. But my body wouldn't obey. It was like my limbs belonged to someone else. The nurse leaned in. Reintegration takes time. She injected the syringe. Cold fire crawled up my arm. Then everything blurred. Weeks passed, or maybe hours. Time no longer obeyed logic. They called me by a different name, Mira. They showed me photos of a life I'd never lived. A husband, a child, a house by the sea. None of it was mine. But the longer I stayed, the more the photos felt real. The more the lullabies soothed instead of unsettled. The more I began to doubt myself. Was I the girl from the attic? Or was I the woman from the beach? One night, they wheeled in a visitor, my mother. But not my mother. She was clean now, polished, in a navy dress, hair pinned, eyes empty. "Who are you?" I asked. She smiled. "I'm who you needed me to be." And then I knew. They hadn't just reprogrammed her, they'd recast her. The original. Gone, absorbed, erased. She was the mask now, and I was next. But something deep inside me, something older, refused. The cracks were there. In the walls, in the schedule, in the voices at night. And so I waited, watched, listened. And on the night the humming stopped, for the first time in years, I moved. I found the panel behind the bed. The vent shaft crawled through darkness, rats, heat, memory. I emerged in the administrative wing. The files were there. My name, all versions of it. Any Mira. Subject B, Control Group 7. All stamp it. Raparasesa krempiot and a nota, last of line, retention mandatory, transfer to vault. I didn't know what vault meant until I saw the elevator sub, basement, floor 6. I went down. It was colder than ice. A hallway of mirrors, each reflecting not me, but different versions of me. Braided, blindfolded, screaming. At the end a door. On it a plaque. Deep to now I say I'm PRYRMT to USUBJT. I pushed it open. It was to iris me. Hooked to wires, floating in a tank, eyes open, watching. Breathing. The real me. The first me. I don't know. But I heard her voice in my mind. "You're ready now." And then, her mouth opened, and my voice came out. "Time to come home." You'd think seeing yourself suspended in liquid, wires snaking from every limb, eyes wide and unblinking in a tank that pulsed like a mechanical womb, would break your mind. But it didn't. Not mine. Not anymore. The truth was, after everything, the attic photo, the third knock, the diner that never existed, the stranger with no face. This felt almost inevitable, like I was always meant to stand here, face to face with myself, and finally ask the question no one had ever let me ask out loud. Who am I really? But of course I didn't ask, because the version of me in the tank answered first. Her lips didn't move, not in the way flesh should. Instead, her mouth twisted into a slow, unnatural curl, and I heard my voice inside my head, not echoing, not hallucinating. Speaking, directly, "I've been waiting for you." I stumbled back, heart pounding, but my body didn't respond like it should. No panic sweat, no trembling, just stillness, as if I'd trained for this moment my entire life. Maybe I had. The tank hissed. Bubbles rose around her, around me, and in that moment I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just another experiment. This was a transfer. I looked down at my own hands. The skin was pale, fingers twitching. My reflection in the glass shimmered as if something beneath was reaching up. To replace, to overwrite. I wasn't the visitor in this room. I was the variable, and the program had just decided to reconcile the equation. I turned to run, and slammed into a wall that hadn't been there seconds before. A mirror, but this one showed nothing, no reflection, just black and absence. And yet it moved. My absence moved. Behind me, the tank began to drain. I heard her steps before I saw her, wet footprints, but not from the tank, from inside me. A new layer unfolding, like old wallpaper peeling back to reveal a wall that had always been bleeding. A voice whispered behind my teeth, "Integration is love. Integration is truth. Integration is survival." I started to scream, but the sound didn't leave my body. It looped, echoing inside my ribcage, until it felt like it was vibrating my bones apart. The door behind the tank opened on its own. Beyond it, not a hallway, not a lab, a childhood bedroom. Mine. But wrong. The corners too sharp, the colors slightly off, like it had been recreated from memory. A memory not mine. On the bed sat a doll I hadn't seen since I was 6, her button eyes glinting, her stitched mouth pulled open with thread like she'd been mid-laugh when someone silenced her. Above the headboard was a frame. Inside it, a photograph. The one from the attic. The girl, the same gap-toothed smile. Only now, she was alone in the image. No bike, no trees, just a long empty road behind her. I stepped into the room. I couldn't help it. My feet moved without permission. The door slammed shut behind me, locks clicked. Then, silence, and then the humming. But now I recognized it. Not a lullaby, not even a song. It was data, transmissions. Repetitive, layered with code and command. And it was trying to rewrite me. I dropped to my knees, gripping my skull, the pressure mounting until I thought my eyes would burst. I saw flashes, needles in my gums, a white hallway with red handprints, a birthday party where no one had faces, my mother screaming into an empty crib. Then everything stopped. I opened my eyes. I was no longer in the room. I was back in the facility. But the other facility, the one from my dreams, the original home, clean, alive, operative. I stood in line with other girls, all wearing gray, all silent, none blinking. We moved in formation, like dancers, like machines. And I was one of them. I looked down. My hands were small, my arms thin. I wasn't me anymore. I was her. Enya. The real Enya. I had gone backwards. Somehow they had pulled me through, not just into the program, but into its history. I turned, tried to scream, to wake up, to tear myself from this body. But I couldn't. The world was stable, solid. This was no hallucination. It was a broadcast. And I was now a receiver. They marched us to a room, the room of lessons. It was called on the door. Inside, a screen, a chair, and a figure in white gloves. Clipboard. No face. The screen flickered on. My life played again. Only this time, it was corrected. In this version, my mother never escaped. I was born in a lab, raised in control, never left, never asked questions, never saw the attic or the letters or the knock. And the real twist, everyone I'd ever known was part of it. The teacher who once hugged me too long, the boyfriend who dumped me by text and vanished from the internet, even the mailman who always whistled the same 3-note tune. All monitors, all actors. The facility had never let me leave. They had just changed the stage. The voice came again, not from the screen this time, from inside the chair. You've arrived at yourself. I looked closer. The chair was occupied by the body from the tank, dressed like me, wearing my face. But her eyes were wrong, too wide, too still. She smiled and whispered, "Time to switch places." Suddenly, the screen flashed white. Pain erupted through me. Not physical, but architectural. Like the very shape of my mind was being rearranged. Memories rewrote themselves. I remembered being born in the facility. I remembered the gloves, the chair, the injections. I remembered volunteering. Only none of that had happened, right? I gripped the edges of my mind, refusing to let them go. I clawed through the memories, trying to find my anchor, my real memory, and I found it. The braid, the attic, the peeling wallpaper. I held it like a rope, like a lifeline in the storm, and then I pulled. Everything shattered. The screen, the voice, the chair. I fell backward through myself, through time, through layers of identity stacked like nesting dolls, until I landed on the cold, damp floor of the first basement. Back in the present. Back in the ruins of St. Delora. Alone, or so I thought. The tank was empty. The version of me that had floated in it. Gone. No sign of fluid. No wires, no evidence. But something was written on the glass, in condensation. Phase 6 observation. I turned slowly. In the far corner of the room, a mirror. And in its reflection, not my face, but hers watching. Smiling. Waiting. There's a sound glass makes when it breaks without touching anything. A hum just before it gives. That's what I heard as I stared at the mirror in the corner of the room, watching her watching me. My reflection, but wrong. Not cracked or distorted, just evolved. The girl in the mirror no longer looked uncertain or afraid. Her smile wasn't wide. It was subtle, assured. Like someone who knew how the story ended and was just waiting for me to catch up. And somewhere deep in my gut, something primal stirred. because for the first time I understood something that had always been true, buried just beneath the surface. She hadn't replaced me. She hadn't taken my place. She was me, not in some metaphorical, split personality, tortured psyche kind of way. No, literal, clinical. Designed, that version, the one they cultivated in tanks and labs and whispered lullabies to through machines, wasn't a mistake or a copy. She was the original. I was the echo. The experiment wasn't about reprogramming a girl who had escaped. It was about testing whether a clone could forget it was a clone long enough to pass as human, long enough to live a normal life, long enough to feel pain, grief, love, identity, and then long enough to choose to return. Integration wasn't a failure of memory. It was a test of memory's limit. The realization hit me like a vacuum pulling the air from my lungs. The attic, the braid, the whispers, the mysterious photo. They were planted, not to hide the truth, but to nudge me back toward it, breadcrumbs leading me home, leading me here. To the vault. To the mirror. To her. She raised her hand. I didn't. The mirror wasn't reflecting anymore. It was broadcasting. I took a step forward, and she took a step back. Mocking rehearsed. Then the final crack formed. Right between her eyes. A fine silver line that ran down her cheek like a tear. And her smile faded. She mouthed something. I leaned in. Her lips formed 4 words. You were never born. That's when the walls began to move. Not collapse. Retract. Like the room itself was folding inside out. Machines hissed to life in the walls. Lights pulsed in long, rhythmic codes. The floor dropped in temperature so fast frost webbed under my feet. A low chime began to play, not music. A pattern Zo303, Zo303. The hour of my rebirth. The hour of the knock. The hour they always activated. I had to leave. But when I turned toward the exit, it wasn't there anymore. Only a hallway I didn't recognize, lined with mirrors, endless, each reflecting a version of me. Brunette, redhead, child, elderly, some missing eyes, others smiling with too many teeth. Each a test, each a trial. And in the very last one, far down the corridor, I saw her again, the real Anya, older now, dressed in civilian clothes, a scarf around her neck, but her eyes were unmistakable, sad, full, wounded in ways time doesn't heal. She saw me too, and stepped out from the glass. No sound, no transition, no science, just presence. She looked at me like someone looking at a photograph of their past. Nostalgic, distant, but not sentimental. Then she spoke. I had to know, she said, if a memoryless version of me could survive without being haunted by the past. I said nothing. She continued, you did better than I thought. You almost made it. What am I? I finally asked. You're the best part of me. The part I had to cut away so I could pretend to live. She smiled, this time with sadness. But you were never meant to last? And then that's when I saw it. Her hand trembled. Not from fear. From age. She wasn't just older, she was dying. Whatever she had done to escape, it had cost her longevity. And she had come back not to save me, not to explain, but to replace me. Again, I staggered back. No. But she held up her hand. You've done your part. Let me rest. Behind her, the tank hummed to life again. A reversal, not a draining, but a summoning, not of her. Of me. She stepped toward it. I did too. But instead of stopping her, I moved with her. Somewhere along the line, the divide between us had blurred. I was her. She was me. We were both real. And neither of us were. As we reached the tank together, a screen flickered on above it. Words appeared, tes completi iamavayavar ilcavo temamarvavardi estabilo gero darochidabien lbnld, and just like that, it all snapped into place. This wasn't about reprogramming one girl, it was about manufacturing generations, a line of Anya units. Memory wiped, dropped into the world, observed, activated. Some went mad, some disappeared, some became mothers. I had been Unit 5. She had been Unit 3, and somewhere, deep underground, or maybe just next door. Units 6 through 9 were probably already sleeping, waiting. She turned to me one last time and whispered, finish it. And she stepped into the tank. I didn't follow. I picked up the clipboard by the wall, flipped to the last page. It said, remaining unit must make final decision, merge or isolate. It was never about obedience. it was about choice. So I made mine. I walked past the tank, past the hallway of mirrors, past the humming systems, and found a steel door marked EXT. The code, 0303, I pressed the keys. The door opened into daylight. Real bright, burning daylight. I stepped through, and the last thing I heard, as her voice one final time, "You were never born, but now you are." I didn't turn back. Not to the facility. Not to her. Not to the story they wrote for me. Because the twist no one expected, as that I didn't need to be real to be free. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.